Hey everyone, and a special shout out to all our UPSC aspirants listening in.
You know them, yeah.
Today, we're diving deep into a topic that's super relevant to both prelims and mains, disaster resilience, and more
Yeah.
specifically, India's telecom infrastructure.
Oh, very important.
We're basing this deep dive on a recent report from
Yeah.
the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure,
The CDRI.
CDRI, featured in the Hindu.
It's a crucial area for UPSC exams because it kind of brings together disaster management,
Right.
infrastructure development, and current affairs all in one package.
Exactly. And the report really digs deep into how prepared India's telecom networks are to handle natural disasters. Cyclones,
Yeah,
earthquakes,
those heavy
those
monsoons.
heavy monsoon floods the whole gamut. And get this, it highlights a vulnerability I hadn't even considered before: India's reliance on undersea cables for global internet connectivity.
Oh, interesting.
What happens to those during a cyclone or earthquake, especially along the coasts?
That's a critical point because those cables, they're like lifelines for communication, right?
Right.
Imagine trying to coordinate rescue efforts during a disaster and suddenly the network's down as a crucial undersea cable snapped. That's not just an inconvenience, it's a potential catastrophe.
It really underscores how much we depend on communication
Every day.
every day until it's gone.
Exactly.
And the report doesn't just point out the problems, it offers solutions, short-term fixes, long-term strategies, the whole works.
It's like a roadmap for building a more resilient future for India's communication networks.
Yeah.
A blueprint, if you will.
Okay, so let's break this down, starting with the basics. Why is telecom infrastructure so crucial during a disaster, and what are some of the biggest challenges it faces?
Well, think of telecom infrastructure as the nervous system of any disaster response effort. It facilitates communications between the National Disaster Management Authority,
The NDMA.
right, the NDMA, and the local administrations, emergency services, and those stranded in affected areas, even between the state and central governments coordinating relief work.
It's like the central nervous system of the whole operation.
Precisely. Now, the report highlights power failures as the most significant vulnerability. Telecom towers need a constant power supply to function, and disasters often cause widespread blackouts. Imagine a scenario where rescue efforts are stalled because communication towers are down due to power outages.
It's like trying to run a marathon on an empty stomach. You just can't perform at your best or even function at all.
That's a great analogy, and it's not just power failures. The report also points to the structural weaknesses of many telecom towers, particularly against strong winds. Plus, you've got those overhead cables, extremely susceptible to damage from heavy rain or wind.
So we've got power failures, weak towers, and vulnerable cables. Not exactly a recipe for a resilient system. But the report doesn't just leave us hanging with these problems, right? It offers solutions.
That's where it gets interesting and highly relevant for UTSC aspirants. The CDRI report provides a comprehensive set of solutions categorized into short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategies.
Okay, let's dive into those solutions, starting with the immediate needs. What can be done in the short term to improve the resilience of India's telecom infrastructure?
In the short term, think about immediate actions that can be implemented within the next year or two. One key recommendation is bolstering the power backup systems at telecom towers. Imagine having enough fuel reserves or alternative power sources to keep those towers running, even during extended blackouts.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like having a backup generator at home in case of a power outage. What else is on the list of immediate actions?
Another crucial step is implementing software for real-time damage monitoring. It's like an early warning system for the telecom network. Imagine software that can pinpoint exactly which parts of the network have been affected by a disaster, allowing for quicker response and repair.
It's about getting ahead of the problem before it snowballs into something even bigger. And what about those high-risk areas we talked about earlier, coastal regions, earthquake zones? Are there specific recommendations for those?
Absolutely. The report specifically highlights the need to prioritize infrastructure upgrades in high-risk areas. This could include reinforcing towers to withstand strong winds or relocating critical equipment to less vulnerable locations.
So it's about focusing on the areas that are most likely to be hit by a disaster and making sure they're as prepared as possible.
Exactly. It's a targeted approach to resilience building.
Okay, so we've covered the immediate needs, the short-term fixes.
Right.
But what about the bigger picture? What are the medium-term and long-term strategies for creating a truly disaster-resilient telecom infrastructure in India?
Well, picking up where we left off, let's look at the medium term, focusing on what can be achieved over the next 3 to 5 years. Here, the report suggests some structural changes that could significantly enhance resilience.
Perfect, let's hear them. These medium-term solutions sound particularly relevant for anyone aiming to ace the UPSC WANS exam.
Absolutely. One key recommendation is transitioning to underground fiber optic networks nationwide.
Okay.
Remember those vulnerable overhead cables we discussed? Burying them underground significantly reduces the risk of damage from storms and other disasters. It's a strategic investment with long-term benefits.
Out of sight, out of mind, and hopefully out of harm's way. Makes sense to me. What else is on the medium-term agenda?
Another important recommendation is mandating disaster proofing for all newly constructed telecom towers. Imagine raising the bar for resilience right from the design and construction phase, ensuring that new towers can withstand the impact of cyclones, earthquakes, and other natural hazards.
So we're talking about building resilience from the ground up, literally. It's a proactive approach that could save a lot of trouble down the line. But even with all these measures, outages are still bound to happen, right? No system is perfect.
You're absolutely right. That's why the report emphasizes the importance of a coordinated response mechanism specifically for telecom outages. Imagine a clear plan of action ready to be implemented the moment the network goes down.
A sort of rapid response team for telecom infrastructure. Sounds crucial, especially during a disaster scenario. Who would be involved in this coordinated response mechanism?
The report envisions a collaborative effort between the Department of Telecommunications,
The DOT.
right, the DOT, and the various telecom operators. This collaboration could involve sharing resources, expertise, and information to restore services as quickly as possible.
It's like a team effort, everyone working together to get communication back online. Now let's zoom out to the long term. What's the ultimate vision for India's telecom infrastructure?
The report sets a bold and ambitious target, achieving a 100% disaster-resilient telecom infrastructure across the entire country.
Wow.
It's a vision that reflects the critical importance of communication in a nation that's increasingly vulnerable to climate change impacts.
It's an ambitious goal, but definitely one worth striving for. Reaching that level of resilience would be a game changer for India. But getting there requires more than just physical infrastructure upgrades, right?
You hit the nail on the head. Achieving this vision requires a multifaceted approach that includes policy changes, regulatory frameworks, and innovative financial mechanisms.
So we're talking about a holistic approach that addresses not just the hardware, but also the systems and policies that govern the telecom sector. Can you give us some examples of what these policy and regulatory changes might look like?
Absolutely. The report highlights the need for clear guidelines and regulations at both the national and state levels to ensure everyone is on the same page when it comes to disaster preparedness and resilience. Imagine a scenario where every new infrastructure project, whether it's a road, a bridge, or a building, has to incorporate disaster resilience measures right from the design stage.
It's about integrating resilience thinking into every aspect of development planning. Makes a lot of sense. But these large-scale infrastructure upgrades and policy changes require a lot of funding, right? Where would that come from?
That's where public-private partnerships, or PPPs, come into play. The report emphasizes the need to leverage private sector investment and expertise to scale up solutions and drive innovation in the telecom sector.
So it's about sharing the load and tapping into the expertise and resources of both the public and private sectors. It's a collaborative approach that could unlock a lot of potential. And speaking of innovation, the report mentions a really interesting financial tool, parametric insurance. Can you explain how that works and how it could contribute to building a more resilient telecom infrastructure?
Absolutely. Parametric insurance is a fascinating concept. Unlike traditional insurance, where you have to prove losses to get a payout, parametric insurance is triggered by a specific event, like a cyclone reaching a certain wind speed or an earthquake hitting a specific magnitude.
So it's less about assessing the damage after the fact and more about having a pre-agreed plan based on the severity of the disaster. That sounds like a much faster and more efficient way to get funds flowing when they're needed most.
Exactly. And in the context of telecom resilience, this rapid access to funds is crucial for minimizing downtime and ensuring that communication networks are restored as quickly as possible.
So we've got this multi-pronged approach to building a disaster-resilient telecom infrastructure, strengthening existing systems, adopting innovative technologies, implementing smart policies, and exploring new financial tools like parametric insurance. It's a comprehensive strategy that acknowledges the interconnectedness of infrastructure, disaster management, and economic development.
And for those of you prepping for the UPSC exams, understanding these interconnected challenges and analyzing the proposed solutions is key. This deep dive into the CDRI report is designed to give you the knowledge and insights you need to tackle those tricky questions in both prelims and mains.
It's about demonstrating that you can not only recall facts and figures, but also critically analyze complex issues and propose solutions that are both practical and effective. And speaking of practical solutions, there's one specific recommendation from the report that I found particularly interesting, the Dig Once policy. It sounds pretty straightforward, but I think it's worth explaining in a bit more detail, especially for those who might not be familiar with the concept.
The Dig Once policy is a great example of a simple yet effective solution. It's all about coordination and maximizing efficiency when it comes to infrastructure development. Imagine this. Instead of digging up the same road multiple times for different projects, you do it all at once.
So if you're digging up a road to lay down water pipes, you also lay down the fiber optic cables for the telecom network at the same time. That saves time, money, and reduces disruption to the public. It's a win-win situation.
Exactly. And from a disaster resilience perspective, having those fiber optic cables buried underground makes them much less vulnerable to damage from storms or other hazards. It's a smart, proactive approach that contributes to a more resilient infrastructure overall.
Okay, we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We talked about strengthening telecom infrastructure, but
Right,
what about the people who actually rely on it, right?
right.
How can we use technology and innovation to not just make the hardware tougher,
Yeah.
but also empower those communities to be more resilient?
It's a crucial point because building a truly resilient system requires more than just strong towers and cables.
Right,
It requires informed and prepared communities.
exactly. And think about it, UPSC aspirants. You're not just dealing with technical specs and budgets here, you're dealing with people's lives. How can technology help bridge that gap?
Well, imagine early warning systems that send targeted alerts to mobile phones
Mm.
before a disaster hits,
Yeah,
or mobile-based platforms sharing real-time updates on relief efforts to help people make better decisions.
it's about using technology to get that vital information to the people who need it most,
Exactly.
when they need it most.
Exactly. And let's not forget about training programs at the community level. Equipping people with the knowledge and skills they need to respond effectively during a disaster can be just as important as having a robust telecom network.
It's about having both, right? Strong infrastructure and a well-prepared population. A holistic approach to resilience.
Absolutely.
So for our UPSC listeners out there, that's a key takeaway. Understanding the connection between infrastructure, technology, and community preparedness is crucial for effective disaster management.
It really is.
It's about seeing that big picture, understanding how everything's connected, and coming up with solutions that actually work for everyone. It's about building a future where India not only weathers these disasters, but emerges stronger and more resilient than ever before.
Well said. And remember, folks, we've drawn all this information from a recent report by the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, or CDRI, featured in The Hindu. We'll include a link in the show notes so you can check out the full report. It's a must-read for anyone seriously prepping for the UPSC exams.
And as always, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the proposed solutions, especially those focused on empowering communities? Let us know in the comments. We're eager to hear your perspective.
Absolutely. Your insights and questions help us all learn and grow, so don't be shy. Join the conversation.
And before you go, hit that subscribe button and share this deep dive with your fellow UPSC aspirants. Let's spread the knowledge and empower more future leaders to make a real difference.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those aspirations soaring.
See you in our next deep dive.